All right, ready to dive into one of history's most debated events.
Always ready for a good debate.
This one's a big one. The trial and execution of Jesus.
You're not kidding. Definitely a deep dive.
You specifically asked for a breakdown of, well, all the power dynamics, especially regarding Pontius Pilate.
Right, and the role of the Jewish people in all of this. Can't forget about that.
Absolutely. So it's not just a story about one man's death. It's a collision of Roman law, Jewish custom.
Oh, yeah, and a whole lot of simmering political unrest, that's for sure.
A powder keg waiting to explode.
You could say that again.
And right in the middle of it all.
Pontius Pilate?
Exactly. So let's unpack his motivations. What leads a Roman governor to condemn Jesus?
Well, the thing is, our sources, they paint a pretty interesting picture of Pilate. He wasn't exactly a straightforward villain.
No. Not just some mustache-twirling bad guy.
Not quite. He was more of a man caught in a web of his own making.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do you mean by that?
His past in Judea, it wasn't pretty. He'd made some serious missteps, and those missteps, they had consequences.
Ah, so his past was coming back to haunt him. Makes sense.
Exactly. He was more worried about keeping Rome happy, keeping his own neck off the chopping block. Justice wasn't exactly his top priority.
It's easy to judge from a distance of 2,000 years, but...
Oh, for sure. But imagine you're in his shoes. You're a Roman governor, an outsider ruling a place as volatile as Judea was, every decision scrutinized, your career constantly on the line.
Talk about pressure. I'd be a nervous wreck.
You and me both. And here's the kicker. All of this goes down during Passover.
Oh, man. Of all times.
Right. Jerusalem was packed. Jewish pilgrims everywhere. Emotions running high. Talk about a tinderbox.
I bet. Passover back then, though, it wasn't just a religious holiday, was it?
Not at all. It was a huge reminder of Jewish identity. Celebrating their liberation from, guess who?
The Romans, of course.
Bingo. So yeah, from a Roman perspective, this whole King of the Jews thing, not exactly what they wanted to hear.
I can only imagine. Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. The last thing Pilate needed was a rebellion on his watch. Talk about a career ender, and then...
Enter Jesus.
Precisely. A man accused of inciting rebellion, forbidding taxes.
And, of course, claiming to be a king.
The big one. Directly challenging Roman authority. Not exactly a smart move if you're trying to stay on Pilate's good side.
You think anyone ever pointed that out to Jesus?
Well, that's the thing. Our sources all seem to agree. Jesus never actually defended himself against these charges.
Wow. Not a word.
Not a peep. A powerful silence. It really makes you think.
It does. What do you think it means?
Well, I think it says a lot about who Jesus was, what he stood for. This wasn't about earthly power, not about politics.
It was certainly a powerful statement, even more so considering what happens to him. But for Pilate, this just raises the stakes.
Absolutely. What do you do with this guy? He's compelling. You can tell he's got something, but...
But he's also completely defiant.
Exactly. And Pilate can't just ignore that. Too dangerous.
And let's not forget about Claudia Procula, Pilate's wife.
Ah, Claudia. Always a fascinating character in this story. Those sources that mention her dream. Very unsettling stuff.
Right before the trial, wasn't it? What do you think it meant?
It obviously shook her. Some historians even think she tried to warn Pilate, maybe influenced his reluctance to condemn Jesus. Hard to say for sure.
It's definitely an interesting detail. So we've got Pilate nervous, trying to keep a lid on a potential uprising.
And we've got Jesus, seemingly divinely inspired.
But completely indifferent to the danger he's in. And let's not forget, the mob, ready to explode. So Jesus is completely silent during all of this.
Pretty much. It's almost like he's
got bigger fish to fry.
If you say that. But meanwhile, Pilate, he's sweating bullets trying to figure out what to do.
I bet. Okay, so walk me through this trial. How does it actually play out?
Well, that's where things get even crazier. Because the trial itself, it was basically a sham.
Oh, come on. You're kidding.
I wish I was. Our sources are unanimous on this one, a complete mockery of justice.
Like, what do you mean? Give me the dirty details.
Okay, so first of all, no formal indictment. None.
Wait, so they just drag him in there without any official charges?
Pretty much. And the evidence. Non-existent. No credible witnesses either.
This is sounding less like a trial and more like...
a public execution.
Bingo.
Right. And get this. Our sources actually record Pilate himself admitting Jesus is innocent.
Whoa, hold on. He actually says it out loud.
Yep. Imagine being there, the pressure, the crowds, and Pilate just comes out and says it. Wild, right?
Absolutely wild.
Yeah.
Okay, but if he knows Jesus is innocent, why go through with it? What's the angle?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I don't think it was courage, that's for sure. More like desperation.
Desperation to do what? Save his own skin.
Exactly. Pilate's stuck between a rock and a hard place. He wants out of this mess, and he doesn't care how he gets there. So we see this whole back and forth between Pilate and the Sanhedrin.
Hold up. Remind me, who are the Sanhedrins again?
Right, so the Sanhedrin, they're the Jewish religious court, and they want Jesus gone.
They want him dead.
Exactly. But Pilate, he's looking for a loophole, some kind of legal out.
So it's a game of hot potato. No one wants to be the one holding the grenade when it explodes.
Pretty much. It's almost comical when you think about it. Our sources even mention Pilate trying to pass Jesus off to Herod Antipas.
Herod? Why him?
Well, Herod's the ruler of Galilee, right? Where Jesus is from. So Pilate thinks maybe he can wash his hands of the whole thing.
Not my problem anymore, buddy. He's yours to deal with.
Right. Classic bureaucratic move, but no dice.
Herod didn't want to touch this either.
Not a chance. Herod was nobody's fool. He sees right through Pilate's little scheme and sends Jesus straight back to him.
So much for that plan.
Yep. The pressure's really on now. Pilate's trapped. He's got an innocent man he can't legally condemn, and a mob that wants blood. What's he gonna do?
It's like something out of one of those old gladiator movies. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Except in this case, all thumbs seem to be pointing down. But here's the thing. Even with all this pressure, our sources tell us Pilate actually tries to free Jesus. Multiple times.
Really? He tries to let him go.
Yep. He even offers a less severe punishment, what they called chastising.
Chastising. That doesn't sound too fun. What did that involve exactly?
Let's just say it wasn't a walk in the park. It would have been brutal. A scourging, most likely. A really nasty whipping.
Ouch. Designed to make you think twice about, well, anything, really.
Exactly. Painful, humiliating, but crucially, not a death sentence.
So a compromise. Appease the crowd without actually killing the guy.
Exactly. It was Pilate's last-ditch effort to salvage the situation, maybe even his conscience. But ultimately, it wasn't enough.
The crowd wanted more.
They wanted blood, and Pilate, he knew it.
So what finally pushes him over the edge?
Fear, plain and simple. Fear of what the mob might do, fear of the Sanhedrin's influence.
And probably a healthy dose of fear of what Rome would do if things got out of hand.
Oh, absolutely. Can you imagine a full-blown riot in Jerusalem? Word of that gets back to Caesar. Not good for career advancement.
Career suicide. So fear wins out.
Sadly, it often does, but there's one final twist in this story, one that I think really highlights the madness of it all.
Lay it on me. What's the twist?
It's this whole episode with Barabbas. Now, picture this.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
It's Passover, right? Big holiday. And as a gesture of goodwill, the Roman governor, he gets to release a prisoner.
A little get-out-of-jail-free card.
Exactly. Appease the crowds, score some brownie points. It was a whole thing. And Pilate, he sees this as his golden opportunity, his chance to finally get rid of this whole Jesus problem.
So he presents the crowd with a choice. Jesus goes free, or
someone else does.
And this is where Barabbas comes in.
You got it. But Barabbas, he wasn't just any prisoner. Our sources describe him as this notorious figure.
Notorious how? What did he do?
Oh, you know, the usual. Murder, sedition, inciting riots, the works.
Not exactly someone you'd want as your neighbor.
Not unless you're into that sort of thing. So Pilate probably thought, easy choice, right? Release Jesus, the guy I claim is innocent, or this Barabbas character.
Who in their right mind would choose Barabbas?
Exactly. But, and here's the kicker, the crowd, they choose Barabbas.
Seriously, they want to release this murderer.
Yeah. They're whipped into a frenzy, egged on by the Sanhedrin, demanding the release of this dangerous criminal over a man their own governor admits is innocent.
Talk about a rigged game. It's incredible, isn't it, how quickly things can spiral out of control. You've got this crowd, they're worked up, they're scared.
And they're being manipulated. Let's not forget about that. The Sanhedrin knew exactly what they were doing.
It's a scary thought, really. The power of fear, the power of a mob. It makes you wonder how often something like this is played out throughout history.
More often than we'd like to think, I'm sure. But there's one more layer to this whole thing, one that I find particularly fascinating.
Okay, I'm listening. Hit me with it.
It's this. Through this entire ordeal, through the arrest, the trials, the crowd screaming for his blood, Jesus is practically silent.
Right. We talked about that. He doesn't defend himself, doesn't try to plead his case. It's almost like he's...
Resigned to his fate.
Yeah, kind of. But it's more than that, isn't it? There's a purpose behind it. At least that's what some people believe.
Absolutely. And this is where we get into some pretty deep theological waters. Because there's this one exchange between Jesus and Pilate.
Go on.
Jesus basically tells him, look, you think you have power over me. Think again. This is all happening because it was allowed to happen.
Powerful stuff. It's almost like he's saying this was all meant to be.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Predestination versus free will. If Pilate was always going to do this, was he even really making a choice?
That's a tough one. And it's a question that people are still debating centuries later.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, why wouldn't Jesus be a little easier on Pilate?
Good point. And this is where things take another turn, because even though Jesus basically says Pilate was a pawn in a bigger game, he also says something else.
What's that?
He says that those who handed him over, the ones who orchestrated the whole thing, they bear a greater sin than Pilate.
Whoa, hold on. He's saying Pilate, the guy who literally sentenced him to death, is somehow less guilty than the people who...
Well,
John turned him in.
Exactly. And on the surface, it seems kind of messed up,
Just a tad.
But think about it this way. Pilate, he was a coward, sure. Ambitious, more concerned with his own neck than with justice.
Those are definitely not great qualities.
Oh, not at all. But the point is, he was acting out of very human weaknesses. He was afraid. But the others, they knew better.
So it's more about intent. They knew what they were doing was wrong, but they did it anyway.
Exactly. They were blinded by their own ambitions, their own sense of righteousness. They thought they were doing the right thing, and that, in a way, is even more terrifying.
Because it's easier to justify doing something terrible when you convince yourself it's for the greater good. It's a sobering thought.
Isn't it? And it makes you wonder, 2,000 years later, sitting here talking about it, where do we fit into all of this?
That's the big question, isn't it? What are we supposed to learn from all of this?
I think it comes down to this. Recognizing that even though this was thousands of years ago, this story, it's still relevant.
How so?
Because we all face those same choices, those same temptations. To choose the easy path, to stay silent when we should speak up.
To go along with the crowd, even when we know it's wrong.
Exactly. And so the question becomes, what choices are we going to make? How are we going to choose to live our lives? That's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about what happened to Jesus. It's a mirror held up to ourselves. And that's something worth thinking about, don't you think?
Absolutely. A lot to unpack there. Thanks for taking us on that deep dive. It's definitely given us all a lot to think about.